Been researching voter fraud on and off for decades, and I'm in touch with a whole network of attorneys who work on voter fraud issues. And what we have found is that some of the voter rolls in the swing states are chock full of illegal aliens and other people who should not be on the voter roll.
In recent years, our nation has been threatened by alarming reports of voter fraud, ballot scams, and all kinds of election manipulation. Some liberal judges are even going so far as to actively try to suppress laws that would require very simple voter ID measures. The stakes have never been higher as we witness an alarming crisis in trust in our electoral processes. I mean, we've been seeing major corruption getting exposed, particularly in swing states. And finally, President Trump is getting to work. U.S. Attorney Alina Habba has just announced the creation of an election integrity task force that'll work with the FBI to remove ineligible voters from voter rolls and prosecute election fraud. Now, this move, tied to President Trump's March 2025 executive order, aims to enhance information sharing with state and local officials to efficiently remove ineligible voters like non-citizens or deceased individuals from all voter rolls. In addition, this task force will investigate and prosecute election crimes such as voter registration fraud, multiple voting, or foreign interference in U.S. elections. Now, while this task force could set a precedent for other districts to follow, especially in swing states, nevertheless, a number of states are actively resisting such efforts to safeguard our elections. So, for example, Gavin Newsom recently signed a law banning the requirement of voter IDs throughout the entire state of California. And while such bizarre efforts might have the effect of empowering left-wing politicians, they only end up further eroding faith and confidence in the integrity of our elections among our population as a whole. But our guest today says there is hope on the horizon. Seth Keshel is back with us. Seth has been working tirelessly to expose electoral injustices and equip citizens with knowledge to fight back, ensuring a brighter future for our electoral system. Click the link below to check out and subscribe to Seth's awesome Substack, of which I am a subscriber, where you're going to learn all about this vital issue. Seth, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Good to see you too, Dr. Steve. I enjoy seeing you keep up with everything, especially talking about foreign politics. That's the mark of some true sophistication.
Oh, thanks, man. Oh, thank you. Well, I love your stuff. I followed you especially with the Wisconsin special election there with the Supreme Court justice, and you called that as well. You were very sober minded with that, saying, guys, it looks great what we're trying to do and put together, but you were very skeptical that we were going to be able to win that. Again,
well, I'm going to call it like it is, Steve. You know,
yep.
and one of the problems is that elections are not about vote getting anymore; they're about ballot collecting. So yes. Brad Schimmel's ballot total was the highest ever until in the same election he was overcome by Crawford's total of more than 1.3 million ballots. She had almost as many ballots as Hillary Clinton had in a presidential election in 2016. Right. So Schimmel's total dwarfed the previous record set by Janet Protasewicz, who won by 11 points in just 2023, and he got smoked by 10 points.
By 10 points, yep.
Right. So the Democrats have mastered ballot collecting in the upper Midwest and the industrial Midwest, and there's no two ways about it. Milwaukee County and Dane County had almost presidential vote turnouts in an off-year court race.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, you called it. I was very appreciative of that. I was hopeful, but knew that it was stacked against us. No,
I wanted to be wrong.
Yes. Yes, but you aren't normally. You're not. That's the problem.
Well, that's the thing. It's a double-edged sword. Do you want to be right? There's a number of states in 2024 in my presidential picks that I think if elections were played by the same set of rules as they were even 10 years ago, that would have been Trump states. I think Minnesota is a probable Trump state under the old rules. But in my call, I had it as a Harris state because now my models, if you read my piece yesterday about baseball steroid era and elections now, then you have a totally different set of rules that I'm going to call by. So, I called Trump for Pennsylvania under 3 points, even though I think that the trend lines bear out, and we'll get into this, that Trump should have won Pennsylvania handily.
Yeah, by 5+ or something.
Without no excuse mail-in balloting, Pennsylvania is a different ballgame.
Right. Well, you've been speaking out extensively about electoral irregularities for years now. I mean, what's you have a moniker they even called you, I think.
Yeah, it's your audience might tisk at me, but I know my in-laws watch your show, and their political humor has definitely ramped up. It's called electile dysfunction. So I consider it my mission, and I actually have a challenge coin. I'm gonna try to find it without looking at my bag while I'm on your show. But I've got a challenge coin that has that motto on it: is to end electile dysfunction. So I've described that condition. I have a diagnosis for it. It has 4 key characteristics, and the first one is when you have difficulty maintaining an election, or when your election lasts for longer than 4 days. Now, it can come with a sudden, severe, noticeable loss of interest in voting, and in the worst cases, like we have here in Arizona, premature inauguration.
You're spending way too much time alone. We got to get your wife to intervene here. This is hilarious.
Well, she's been waiting on the invite to come on, so you're going to have to break it up. She's the one that would sit there and cross her arms and look at me. But I always remind her that when she's mad, that she's like right here, way down there. I always have to calm her down.
That's right. God, that's hilarious. What are some of the most important voting issues that you see that need to be addressed by the Trump administration? We're seeing some executive orders. We're obviously seeing some judicial pushback, but I think that's irrelevant. They don't have no jurisdiction there. But what do you think is some of the most important things he should be addressing?
Well, it's simple to me. There's a lot of window dressing that we talk about with elections. There's a lot of people that want to go just rip machines out and think that everything's going to run well. Just get rid of mail-in ballots, everything's going to go well. But the reality is the underpinning factor of all electile dysfunction is the corruption of the voter roll. So previously, you had to commit voter registration fraud to muddy up the voter roll, or rely on a Secretary of State or elections officials that don't maintain, clean out the voter roll. And then, of course, somebody has to have access to the bad registrations to know which ones to pair up with a mail ballot request. But in order to get around voter registration fraud, which they identified in Michigan in 2020 in Muskegon County, there's a number of examples of this. And the Michigan State Police sat on it at the order of Governor Whitmer, of course, who's one of the worst people alive. But Michigan had voter registration fraud. Well, what's the best way to get around voter registration fraud is to go for automatic voter registration and blow up the voter rolls organically every time somebody uses government services. But once the voter rolls are sufficiently inflated to where you can call it a credit line for extra ballots, not votes, ballots, then you can go through, and the more mail-in balloting you can greenlight. The dream is to get what's called universal mail-in voting. And that's where the state sends out ballots to everything on the roll. I say everything instead of everyone, because not every registration is representative of a real person that should be voting. But if ballots go out like a geyser to everybody that's on the rolls, and then data goes out to activists or paid organizations or NGOs that are running around and giving 100 names to a paid activist that collects $30 a ballot with a photo proof, then you can very easily, and I'm going to do the math on a future Substack article, probably using Philadelphia as an example, but it's very simple. Looking at my numbers in Pennsylvania, it's very easy to surmise that you could generate 100,000 more ballots out of a major urban county than would otherwise be cast just by going through it and wringing out that rag full of mail-in ballot requests. This is not conspiracy. This is actually well documented. In fact, the FBI under Joe Biden investigated election fraud, but it was in local Democrat primary races in Connecticut and New Jersey. And they dissected how this is done. And it doesn't take a genius to realize, to extrapolate that out, that it's going on in presidential races too, especially when there's so much at stake in Senate races. So it's a matter of shopping for ballots. So the point is, voter registration corruption is the primary catalyst of why we have this condition I call electile dysfunction. And that must be nipped if we are to even have a puncher's chance at having good elections. And there were a number of states that Trump won every time he ran. Florida, Texas, and Iowa come to mind. And he won them by every single state. He won all three of those by 13 or more points. And they all three had major voter roll crunches where they squeezed the voter rolls between 2020 and 2024. And Texas kind of snuck it out there right before the election that we got rid of 1 million voter registrations there and moved on from it. But I've always believed that Texas's 2020 election was highly corrupt, and Biden's vote total was 600,000 over Trump's winning total from 2016 with the average Republican gain being less than 200,000 a year. So Biden had a total of votes in 2020 that would have beaten any Republican except Donald Trump.
Right.
So there was a lot going on in 2020 in the periphery that people don't look for.
Yeah. And I remember in your reading your analysis, which is, again, brilliant. And I encourage everybody to click on the link below and subscribe to Substack. It's phenomenal. But if I recall, I think you were most worried of all the swing states. You were most worried about Michigan, if I recall correct, because of precisely these problems. Am I correct on that? Do I remember correctly?
Michigan and Georgia were the two states that, even though I knew that they belonged to Trump, that I was curious if they were the ones that they were most likely to fall off due to corruption.
Right.
And the reason I picked Michigan in that category is simple. It's math. So look, only 77% of any state population is over the age of 18.
Right.
And therefore eligible to vote. So only 77% of a state's population should even be old enough to vote.
Right.
And then when you deduct people that aren't eligible to vote for a variety of reasons, then you're going to have a number below 75%, probably closer to 70% of any population is going to be even eligible to vote. Michigan had 83% of its total population registered to vote in the 2024 election, which when you run the 6% overage of just the 77%, you're looking at 500,000 or more. So you could make the case that Michigan shouldn't have even been allowed to submit electors to the Electoral College in such a condition. So Michigan was one that, and obviously looking at what they did in the 2018, 2020, and 2022 cycles with the election cheating, and the known problems with corruption rings and voter registration fraud rings, and now the automatic voter registration, that was one to me that if one of them is going to get off the hook and get ripped, it's going to be Michigan. Now, I don't think it got ripped for a number of reasons. Number one, I don't think Josh Shapiro or Gretchen Whitmer had any interest in Harris winning either of their states.
I agree.
Because she's a West Coast crazy liberal Democrat where they're going to both run in 2028. Whitmer's a guarantee, and so is Shapiro. And their calling card is going to be, I'm the only one here that can win Pennsylvania. I'm the only one here that can win Michigan. And if Harris could win it, then that makes them nothing special worth picking as a candidate. So I think that they probably had their dogs get called off in Philly and Detroit, and that's what the numbers bear out. That does bear out that numbers were blown up everywhere else to rip Senate races off, and they almost got PAs. And then also, I think that given that Trump sewed up the Electoral College out east with Georgia, Pennsylvania, and had Wisconsin, I think that there was probably a game time decision to not steal Michigan from Trump because it wasn't necessary anymore.
It wasn't, right.
But in Georgia, of course, Georgia's got the Metro Atlanta problem, which has its own legitimate organic vote problems, but also the problem of automatic voter registration. And one of my most compelling slides, if I were sitting in front of President Trump today, I would show him is the change in voter registration in the 2 cycles preceding them adopting automatic voter registration in just 8 Atlanta counties, Metro Atlanta counties.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
Well, that's gonna be important with the Senate race there in 2026. So what do you see? You know, I could see why the left is resigned to these kind of tactics, because it seems like there's some voter demographic changes that are causing them to seriously worry about future elections. Are you seeing something there with voter demographic changes?
Yes, the left went all in on demographics are destiny. And it was a very simplistic way of looking at the world, not getting into any specifics about any of these folks. But they thought that because America was becoming less white, and by white, I mean non-Hispanic white. This is a thing people fail to understand, is that Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. Right. And as the generations tick by, the Hispanic vote is more resembling the Italian vote of 100 years ago than it is today, right? So you're going to have, and this is just the thing, you go down to Central Texas and South Texas, the people with Rodriguez and Torres names, a lot of them are as white as you and I are, right? So as the decades go by and intermarriage happens, and people have Hispanic background, but they're practically for all intents and purposes, they're whites.
Right.
So they're beginning to vote that way. And the old rule of thumb in the Romney days was that once Hispanics reached 50,000 in household income, when you adjust that for inflation, it's more like 70,000 today. Then they started to naturally break and become more Republican on fiscal issues. But now that Trump has come in and tipped everything over to where it's security, it's borders, it's law and order, and it's less fiscal conservatism, even though you can make the case that it's more because, some of the government efficiency programs, that populism has really ignited the Hispanic vote back towards, hey, these people are the party of working, normal, common sense solutions.
Yeah.
And really is what it's going to create is a Hispanic community where the only people voting Democrat are single women, single moms, and the Hispanic families are the ones that are leading the charge. I saw some graphics recently where Generation Z Hispanic men born between 97 and 2015. Now, obviously, you couldn't vote if you weren't born before 2006 in this last one. Voted for Trump at a higher rate than Generation Z non-Hispanic whites men.
Dang.
Right. So what has happened is the white population is decreasing in its share of the population. And then beginning to behave more like a minority population where whites in all the key states are more Republican than they used to be because they're abandoning the working class Dems, which no longer exist. Right. So you've given some of the white vote back to Democrats with the suburbanite votes, the single women's vote, which is just overwhelmingly Democrat now.
And which is also a shrinking demographic in and of itself, interestingly
correct.
enough.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the
whereas the Latino demographic is growing.
Correct. And President Trump actually progressed with every minority group, he even including religious minority groups.
Yeah.
But President Trump was stronger with the Arab vote. I mean, if you look at what he did in Southeast Michigan, he actually won Dearborn.
Dearborn, right, and Hamtramck.
You're going to have a massive ethnic war going on when Shapiro and Whitmer face off in the 2028 Democrat primaries. But Trump blew it out with Cuban ethnicity, Venezuelan ethnicity, Vietnamese. He did better with Central Asians, which we're talking about Indian Americans. And he did better with Native Americans. He
got a majority, didn't he? Yeah.
Even East Asians, the ones that are irreligious, that aren't interested in the conservative brand of Republican politics, did better with them too. So as the nation is taking shape into what it's going to physically look like, then you're not possibly, the Democrats could have never expected to command such large margins permanently with the political change. So just like you talk about when you talk about European politics and the collusion of parties to keep the populist parties out, France was another great example where Macron's party colluded against Le Pen's party to throw the majority. Well, it's about putting the brakes down on populism. And that's why you have the election fraud, because you can look at the Senate races. Let's just forget 2020 even happened. All right. That's a big one where it's so bad that I don't know just how deep the down ballot impact was. But Adam Laxalt should have won Nevada Senate in 2022. And you should have had Mike Rogers in Michigan, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, Sam Brown in Nevada, and quite possibly Kerry Lake in Arizona in 2024. You'd be looking at 57 or 58 Republican Senate seats before we even consider the impacts of 2020 if you were to unravel all that mess. So can you imagine President Trump in there being able to nominate anybody he wants for any office in the Senate? And now you look at the census corruption that I pointed out in the House, you're looking at the GOP short about 16 net electoral votes and about 15 House seats, depending on where the House seats would have been pulled out of. So the corruption is way bigger than one single point of contact. But the demographics thing has flopped. The only demographics that are non-white that are going to help Dems is how many desperately poor foreigners that can't be assimilated can they bring into the United States. Those are the ones. Those are the ones that they've got all their hopes on. Right.
Yeah. Brilliant. Again, gang, click on the link below to subscribe to Seth's Substack. You get this kind of analysis every single week. A lot of our audience know you've been here with us several times. They know that you're keen on identifying statistical anomalies in election results, like unexpected vote patterns. Can you explain key patterns that you found and how you differentiate them from normal voting behavior?
Absolutely. Every state has presidential voting cycles that are identifiable by the trend in which they exist. All right, so presidential politics are very predictable. Now, when I talk about local races or House races, they're not as predictable because, remember, all politics is local. The ones that take on a bold pattern where you can predict it decades on end, presidential races. That's where you're going to get the most partisan turnout. That's where you're going to find the most correlation to what I look for. I don't care about polling. I might look at polling just like a map check. But as far as when I want to forecast races, the best indicator of future performance is the past, and voter registration by party is what I go to. That is by far the most accurate indicator. And you can look at all my accuracy metrics from 2024. So for a good example, you can look at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of my favorite states to look at this with. Right now, they have a 2% registration advantage for Democrats, just 2%. When Trump won the state in 2016, it was at 10.5%.
Incredible.
And then it
Yeah.
advanced another 3%, which was a 21-1 net new Republican registration rate going into 2020. And somehow Trump lost the state, with Obama record being beaten by both candidates, including a guy that didn't campaign, Joe Biden. Right. And then it was much more Republican in 24 than it was in 20. But when you look at comparable states, look at Ohio. Ohio and Pennsylvania are political cousins. Ohio is somewhat to the right of Pennsylvania, because it doesn't have as much urban dominance as you have from, say, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and slightly more conservative hinterlands, which is beginning to change. But Kamala Harris had fewer votes in 2024 than John Kerry had in 2004 in Ohio. 20 years later, she had fewer votes, even though the state has a modest population gain. Well, Pennsylvania is about the same, with a very modest population gain, which has been dulled by people leaving for red states and lower birth rates. But you have Kamala Harris, who is 500,000 votes ahead of where John Kerry was, despite the massive coalition shift. So when people from one party begin voting in mass for the other party, absent massive population growth from a state like California, or massive immigration, or massive childbirth, you're not going to be able to replace those votes, which is why you see in Ohio that Harris is below John Kerry from 20 years ago, but she's dwarfed Kerry's totals in Pennsylvania, is because they figured out how to corrupt the electoral process. They've corrupted voter registration there. They already had bad voter registration anyway, where I've seen rolls in Pennsylvania with people born in the 1800s that are still on the rolls in 2020. And then you have 2019 Act 77, which allowed for no excuse mail-in balloting in Pennsylvania. That came in 2019. And that is why the trail disappears in 2016, where you could forecast vote totals for both parties based on where one known point comes in, like Trump's vote totals. So when I mapped this out, this was my article yesterday comparing. I took Mark McGwire, who's an admitted steroid user, who was one of my favorites growing up, one of the best home run hitters of all time, steroids or not. And McGwire averaged 36 home runs a year from 1987 to 1992. And he had a peak of 49. He hit 42 one year, but he was good for mid-30s home run total. So he missed a couple of years of injuries in 93 and 94. So if you'd asked me to pick his home run output in 95, I'd have looked at the past and I'd have said 35, maybe if he stays healthy, 40. And I would base that largely on where his age is. And then he comes in, and in 95, he hits 39, which is in his range. And then he goes 52, 58, 70, and 65. So in a 5-year stretch, he averaged 57 home runs a year. So this has fundamentally changed my math in how many home runs I would expect. So if I look at the Democrat decline from 08 to 12 to 16 in Pennsylvania, I noticed that they lose an average of 175,000 votes a year, which, given Trump's record vote gain in 2020 in Pennsylvania, which was bested by Joe Biden having a bigger gain in the same election, it looks to me like the Democrats have given themselves the ability to produce 600,000 to 800,000 more ballots in Pennsylvania than all known indicators and trend lines would otherwise suggest.
Wow.
Which makes Pennsylvania a dead toss-up state rather than an Ohio-style blowout.
Right. A steroid state. Oh, my.
Right. So we have to forecast elections now until further notice based on the new normal, which I always hated the phrase "the new normal" during the COVID year, but or the COVID years. But that's the reality of the situation. Is the elections have been turbocharged, and what it is, I don't know that it's a big boogeyman. I think it's what laws are on the books and what liberties can then be taken to work around the intent of the election, which is to provide safe and secure votes that reflect the intent of the voter, not a ballot collection contest. Practically an adult Easter egg hunt now is what our elections have come down to.
Right. So what can Americans do to support election integrity? What kind of action can we take, and how can we stay informed on all of this?
Well, first off, we have to be knowledgeable. President Trump put out his first executive order on elections, I believe, was a groundwork to move towards bigger things. Like he assigned studies to the DHS to go check out the vulnerabilities of electronic voting equipment, which can be hacked, right? And many experts that are nonpartisan have said this. So I think that there's a groundwork that's going to produce greater things. But insisting that people understand that this is about voter roll corruption, the same voter roll corruption extends into the smurfing that people have identified with the Act Blue and Win Red fundraising scams. It extends into all types. This is why people want the data. Right. So ultimately, it boils down to control, and it boils down to being able to impact the results of elections. But we have to pressure are politicians to not think things are good enough. One very big risk that we have right now is because Donald Trump is back in office. A lot of people's anger about elections was driven by the fact that he was deprived of office in 2020, and now that he's back, that is subsided quite a bit. So we have the risk of that issue going away. Then we have activist courts and judges. So continuing to speak out against people like that is important. But I do not have high hopes for legislation out of the Congress, although there is a great bill called the MESA bill, Make Elections Secure Act, that I have written up many times in my Substack. And it's a dream sheet because it was drafted by election integrity champions Will Huff and Conrad Reynolds out of Arkansas. And that's why it's great. And Pete Sessions from Texas, kudos to him, sponsored that bill. President Trump, I believe, is briefed on it. And I expect that he'll probably support it here in the future. But once again, the electoral manipulation has left us with a very narrow House majority and a Senate that is probably unwilling to pass anything that's substantial. And you see it in the courts, they won't even allow for a citizenship question. So why would something so common sense be denied if they weren't up to something nefarious?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Seth, we have a number of links down below, but where do you want people to go to check out your work? I love your Substack. I definitely want everyone to go there, but anywhere else, X, website, where else?
Sure. I'm backing away from the social media rat race a bit, not Substack. That's my bread and butter. And that's where I put out my key analysis. I've got that lands in the inboxes of a lot of very important people in this country who are helping guide policy. I would encourage everybody to follow me on Substack, skeshel.substack.com. Today, I am the number 13 ranked U.S. politics journal in the rising category, growing faster than all 12 other journals. And I'm in the top 75 on all bestsellers in U.S. politics. So if you want to support my work in election reform, that's a great place to do it. But also, I put out tons of content for free for people to use. And I will never put anything behind a paywall that you absolutely must know. So I would appreciate your support there, skeshel.substack.com. That is Captain Kate's Corner.
Absolutely. And gang, I've joined and I support Seth, and I encourage all of you to do that right now. You're going to love it. You will not be disappointed. This is amazing analysis, election analysis, polling analysis. Well, more. Yeah, you don't do so much polling. I love the way you look at voter registration and then compare voter registration to actual past elections. So you go to hard data in both, and then you find these patterns. That's what makes what you do so brilliant. Again, I saw it on display with the Wisconsin Supreme Court election coming up. Again, guys, just Seth nails it. It's almost Nostradamus-like in a way. Maybe that's the next thing we can.
It never escapes people. Even when you get all the picks right, like, oh, you must be working for the deep state, and they told you what the results were going to be. Right. So things are starting to pick up for me a bit. I'm going to be the keynote speaker in Benton County, Washington on May 17th, Lincoln Reagan dinner. And I've got some appearances in July. It looks like I'm going to be in Bedminster, New Jersey, and then in Montgomery County, PA, and then off to Scott County, Iowa on July 17th.
Oh, cool. Maybe we can break some bread while you're over here on the East Coast. I'm in the Philly area.
Let's do that.
That'd be awesome. That'd be very cool. Seth Keshel, everyone, make sure you click on that link below. Subscribe to his Substack. You will not regret it. Thanks so much, Seth. Let's have you back real soon.
Thanks so much, Dr. Steve. You guys, thanks for your audience also for your role in restoring our country.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth, so much.